meters, but their quest is futile. It's a living nightmare. Most of those trapped are unconscious within minutes. It's now 11 o'clock. As the scale of the catastrophe grows, firefighters from the French town of Chamonix scramble to enter the tunnel. But they manage to travel less than 4 kilometers before their vehicle is engulfed by the wall of smoke. Unable to turn it around, they're forced to abandon it and seek shelter in a maintenance room where they'll remain for 5 hours. Still, no emergency services managed to reach the center of the blaze. Now the first rescuers enter from the Italian side, where the smoke is spreading more slowly. John Whitby is still by his lorry when he sees them.
The wail of sirens came down the tube, and they screamed past us down into the darkness ahead, and they were sort of swallowed up by the smoke, actually.
The Italian volunteer rescuers get within 300 meters, but one patrolman gets within 10 meters of the lorry before a new danger forces them all to turn back.
There were 6 explosions in rapid succession, which were just bang, 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 very quick, and they were very powerful explosions.
Tires from the vehicles explode. They send deadly shrapnel flying.
The tunnel walls shook with the force of the explosion. Within a minute or two of that happening, the fire brigade were back.
As they retreat, the Italians rescue John Whitby and other drivers. Among them is Gilbert de Grave, the driver of the lorry that starts the inferno. They exit the tunnel on the Italian side. They've all made a miraculous escape. It's 11:11. Italian firefighters enter the tunnel to try to tackle the blaze. Leading them is Fire Chief Dionisi Glari.
We could see in the distance a wall of smoke that we tried to penetrate with our vehicle.
But again, the smoke is too thick, and Glari and his team are forced to retreat. They seek shelter in refuge number 24, one of the tunnel's fireproof rooms, where they'll be safe for 2 hours. But for these firefighters, the drama isn't over. They receive word about some colleagues who are trapped, but where? Bravely, Glari and his team leave the safety of Refuge 24 and head out into the smoke to try to find them.
We were walking in the tunnel with one hand along the walls so as to find our way. Reaching the next refuge, we entered, looked around and found there was no one there.
The conditions worsen, and after 10 minutes the firefighters are forced back to Refuge 24 to find, to their disbelief, that the smoke-proof room now offers them little protection.
We saw smoke coming from the ventilation vents that should send clean air into the refuge.
With their breathing apparatus running on empty, they're desperately short of air. Outside, the operation commander hatches a plan. The trapped firefighters are told that beneath the road is a ventilation duct full of fresh air which may offer a means of escape. The problem is finding the door without getting lost in the smoke.
To reach this doorway, we had to use an electrical extension lead that we tied to the door of the refuge and then went to look for the doorway.
At the same time, more Italian firefighters are sent in through the ventilation duct to try to open the door from below.
The moment they opened that door, that was the moment I glimpsed a possibility of escape.
The rescuers become the rescued. After 3 hours, Glari and his team are able to escape through the ventilation duct. But what they don't know is that 38 people are still trapped inside a tunnel where temperatures reach over 1,000 degrees. (11:30). 37 minutes after the lorry erupts in flames, the dense, deadly smoke now stretches more than 6 kilometers, filling the tunnel all the way to the French exit. Firefighters abandon all efforts to attack the flames. No one in the tunnel has a chance of survival. Such is the ferocity of the fire that it burns for 53 hours. Only then can firefighters pick their way through the charred debris. They're horrified to discover the remains of the 38 trapped people. These pictures reveal the true extent of the horror. Those who survive, like Nicholas Borghi, are astonished at the fire's ferocity.
More shocking is that the heat had melted the steel in the lorries. You could only see the basis of the lorries, the skeleton. What could have happened to those poor people left in there?
The disaster takes everyone by surprise. How could such a catastrophe occur here? How could an ordinary lorry carrying an ordinary load of margarine and flour end up causing one of the worst road tunnel disasters on record? From the moment the lorry enters the tunnel, it takes just 14 minutes for 38 people to perish. Now we rewind the events of that fateful day and go deep into the investigation to reveal what really happened. Advanced computer simulation will take us where no camera can go, into the heart of the disaster zone. A team of experts is assembled to investigate the fire. Using their data, we can piece together the deadly chain of events to find out what caused this terrible tragedy. The first mystery facing the experts is what starts the fire in the lorry. They trace the lorry's journey on its approach to the tunnel. This is where problems could first occur. Lorries frequently overheat on the long climb up to the tunnel entrance. Investigators examine the remains of the Volvo lorry. Is there a fault with the FH12 engine? After intensive tests, they find no conclusive evidence of overheating. Then, a breakthrough. The investigators find particles inside the engine that can only have got there if the air filter had burnt before the main fire. But how could the air filter have burnt first? One theory is that a casually discarded cigarette from a passing vehicle enters the lorry's air filter on top of the cabin. The cigarette travels down to the filter, which catches fire. Particles then enter the engine, causing that to catch fire and thus starting the blaze. It's a strong possibility. Investigators then carry out an experiment on a similar lorry in similar conditions. Although not conclusive, it proves a cigarette butt entering the air filter could cause a fire. But that in itself is not enough to cause a tragedy on the scale of the Mont Blanc tunnel fire. So how did this small fire turn into a raging inferno? Deep in the Mont Blanc tunnel, a minor fire suddenly goes out of control. In 14 minutes, 38 people perish. Using advanced computer graphics based on the official reports, we go deep into the investigation to unravel the chain of deadly events. Investigators believe it starts with a small fire smoldering in the engine beneath the cab. 14 minutes from disaster, de Grave enters the tunnel. But the fire only erupts after he stops and abandons his vehicle. Could the movement of air prevent the fire taking hold? Experts know that lorry fires can develop more quickly when vehicles slow down or stop, because then the supply of oxygen increases, which feeds the fire. Ed Galea is a fire expert.
There was a recent example where a bus had caught fire in an alpine tunnel, and the bus driver continued driving, managed to get the vehicle through the tunnel to the other side, managed to evacuate the vehicle, and then the bus erupted into flames.
Perhaps if de Grave had continued driving, he could have made it to the end of the tunnel before the fire flared up. But he didn't. 7 minutes from disaster, he stops halfway through the tunnel. Almost immediately, the lorry bursts into flames. But why did it spread so quickly? Underneath the refrigerated trailer, just meters from the flames, are the lorry's diesel tanks. Investigators realize that in previous lorry fires, diesel is a contributing factor. Did diesel from de Grave's lorry fuel the fire? Didier Lacroix has studied hundreds of fires and knows where to look.
The difference between this fire and the 17 fires that had occurred before was that it started very quickly. They spread to 34 vehicles.
But Lacroix discovers that de Grave's lorry is only carrying 550 liters of diesel. His tank is only half full. It can't explain the rapid spread of the fire. Lacroix digs deeper. He re-examines every second of the lorry's journey from the moment it enters the tunnel. His team turn their attention to the contents of the refrigerated trailer. It's only carrying 9 tons of margarine and 12 tons of flour, a seemingly harmless load. They're not even classified as dangerous goods. But with little else to go on, they begin to experiment with the cargo.
One of the things we discovered was that goods that are not classified officially as dangerous can lead to a very serious fire.
Here, a simple demonstration shows how 1 ton of margarine simulates the cargo. It's wrapped in polystyrene sheets, the same insulation material lining the refrigerated trailer. After just 2 minutes, it proves to be a highly combustible combination.
In refrigerated vans, you have polyurethane, and when this burns, it produces a lot of heat. It burns, it can burn very rapidly. When the margarine melts due to the fire, it's an oil-based material, and it will also rapidly burn, producing quite a lot of heat.
Margarine has a very high energy content. Incredibly, when it's melted, it's almost as dangerous as petrol. Our experiment shows how dangerous things can be in the open air. But fire experts know that in the confines of tunnels, fires burn much more intensely because there are limited outlets for the heat to escape. seconds after the blast. The falling transfer beam sets off what engineers call progressive collapse.
Progressive collapse is collapse that spreads beyond the initial zone of damage.
1 second after the blast, progressive collapse begins to destroy the Murrah building.
You knock over one domino, that falls and it knocks over the next, and so on, and you get this progressive chain reaction.
The transfer beam is the critical element, or domino, in the Murrah. It supports the columns that in turn support the 7 stories above. With the transfer beam gone, the upper floors are fatally weakened, and the building begins to collapse.
Gravity takes another 5 seconds or so to bring the building down.
It's all over in 7 seconds. This is the time it takes the 9th story floor to drop the 31 meters to the ground. More than 5,000 square meters of steel-reinforced concrete collapses into a 2-story-high pile of rubble.
It really isn't the air blast that's hurting people. It is the building that is hurting people.
Among those killed by the collapsing building are Florence Rogers' 8 employees who are with her on the 2nd floor. As the floor slabs collapse, only she survives because she's sitting directly over a supporting beam on the opposite wall from the explosion that remains undamaged.
I didn't realize what a small little portion of my floor didn't break away. Someone said there was only about 18 inches left that didn't break away.
Engineers now know why McVeigh's crude bomb causes such devastation. But was it inevitable? Today, there's an awful realization that an extra $100,000 spent on the construction of the building could have prevented its collapse. April 19, 1995 is a date Oklahoma City will never forget. The day 168 people are killed when a massive truck bomb explodes outside the Murrah Federal Building. But could the building's devastating collapse have been prevented? A new seismic study has assessed how the Murrah building would have responded if it had been built to Californian earthquake-resistant standards, something not required in Oklahoma. Its conclusions are startling. It reveals that only one exterior column and the lower floors would have been damaged. As their computer simulation shows, the building would have remained intact. To meet the earthquake-resistant code, the whole building would have been strengthened with much more reinforced steel. This added steel would have tied the building together and stopped the fatal failure of the transfer beam. The catastrophic progressive collapse would never have happened. It would have cost less than 1% of the building's original construction budget, around $100,000. The study suggests 4 out of 5 of those killed may then have survived. But in 1977, when the Murrah was built, no one ever imagined that it would be the target of a terrorist attack. Those who lived through that terrible day in 1995 still bear the scars. PJ is one of only 6 children from the daycare center who survived. His grandmother, Dolores Watson, mounted a tense vigil beside baby PJ's incubator. For 9 years, he's lived with a tracheotomy tube down his throat to help him breathe. It was only removed in 2003.
I made the statement once that when the trach was out, that PJ and I would be able to move from April 19th to April 20th. But each day when this child looks in the mirror, the scars are still there.
As their second-floor office fell to the ground, Florence Rogers lost 18 of her 33 colleagues at the credit union.
Nothing has ever been the same or ever will be the same. It literally changes your life forever.
She recruited new staff and re-established the company. Then she retired. The falling floors killed Dana Bradley's mother, her son, and 3-year-old daughter. Dana survived the emergency amputation of her leg. Months of treatment followed, but Dana has achieved a miraculous recovery.
We have your new prosthesis all finished up.
Oh man, it was wow. I was like, wow, I'm walking. Beautiful, I love it. I was strutting down the hallway. I loved it. The more I wanted to walk and the more I cared about living.
Our special report.
The remains of the Murrah were destroyed 5 weeks after the attack. Five years later, the site opens as a national memorial to remember the 168 lives lost that day. The site commemorates the exact moment in time that hurt so many. The road the truck parked on is gone, replaced by a lake. There's one chair for every life lost. Man, woman, and child. Across the street from the site of the Murrah, a new federal building opened in 2003. State-of-the-art, its design incorporates key lessons learnt from April 19.
There's no point for the building to stand after the event if everyone inside is killed. It's about saving people.
The lobby, the entrance that funneled so much of the explosion into the Murrah, is now protected by 2-centimeter steel blast shields. The glass is new generation blast-proof material designed not to shatter. But the most effective measure to prevent a repeat of the tragedy is also the cheapest. Ram-proof bollards surround the building's perimeter, so no one can park close to it. This simple step would have stopped McVeigh driving his truck up to the Murrah and limited the destruction that followed. Timothy McVeigh is found guilty of mass murder and executed by lethal injection on June 11, 2001, 74 months after his bomb kills 168 people. But the stark reality remains. There's little that can be done to stop a determined terrorist who decides to target innocent civilians. Most office buildings around the world are just as vulnerable as the Murrah. If a bomb went off outside them, they would react just as catastrophically as the Murrah in those fatal 7 seconds at 9:02 on April 19, 1995.
Into the exclusion zone. 11 minutes to disaster. The first volcanic eruption occurs. The outer part of the lava dome collapses, and a pyroclastic flow cascades over the northern wall of the crater. 8 minutes to disaster. A second eruption occurs, and a larger avalanche of rock and ash pours down the same valley. Then at 1:08 p.m., a third massive eruption sends more volatile material racing down the volcano. It spills over the valley walls at speeds of up to 128 kilometers per hour. A pyroclastic surge breaks away from the flow and spreads across farmland. It sweeps through 3 villages, killing 7 people. The heavy debris continues down Mosquito Gut, destroying more villages, claiming a further 12 lives. In just 25 minutes, 19 islanders are dead.
We made a calculated risk, and I just have to give thanks to the Almighty we survived.
1 month later, with the island still reeling from the disaster, one of Professor Wodge's more extreme scenarios comes true. Sufrir Hills blasts another massive pyroclastic flow down its scorched slopes. It hits the abandoned capital Plymouth and literally wipes it off the map. There was no further loss of life, but it could have been very different. Had the volcano erupted this violently initially, it could have killed thousands. Sufrir Hills has been active for more than 10 years. Today, just under 4,500 proud islanders still live on Montserrat, including Delia Pond, Slim Daly, and David Lee. But they are cornered in the north of this Caribbean paradise. Half of Montserrat is uninhabitable and is expected to remain so for a decade.
On a cold November's evening in 1987, a deadly fire erupted at London's King's Cross tube station. A blazing inferno would eventually engulf the underground passageways and destroy the entire booking hall. But few would have predicted that when the first little flames peeped out of the stairs on the Piccadilly line escalator. Transport policeman Stephen Hanson was one of the first to go down and try to put the fire out.
The more I stamped it, the more I tried to put it out, the worse the flame got, and I knew straight away that it wasn't a normal fire at all. There was a lot of smoke, it was quite hot, but at the back of my mind I thought, well, the fire brigade are going to arrive in a minute and everything's going to be sorted out.
With that comforting thought in mind, Stephen Hanson went back up the stationary escalator to stop the evening's commuters coming down. He would be in the booking hall for just a few short minutes when he was engulfed by flames.
The only way I can describe this is call it a living thing, because it was so massive in its entirety that within a few seconds it had covered the whole ticket office enclosure. I knew that I was in a dangerous situation myself, and that if I stayed much longer I wasn't going to be able to breathe. I arrived at the barrier system, which was metal at the time. The heat was that bad that my hand, when I touched the barrier to leap over, actually stuck to the metal. I had to pull it off, literally. It took a large piece of skin out of my hand, and the skin had melted, and the hands were type of bubbling, and as soon as I heard the screams, the fight for life, the undescribable noises coming from the actual ticket office enclosure.
Because he knew the layout of the underground station, Stephen managed to escape. Third-degree burns covered his head, hands and face, but he was one of the lucky ones. 31 people, including a senior firefighter, lost their lives that night. The task of working out the cause of London's worst tube fire fell to David Halliday. Once underground, he started to examine the Piccadilly line escalator.
Looking up from the bottom of the escalator, I could see that the lowest point of damage, approximately a third of the way up, was more concentrated on the right-hand side. So, turning to the right-hand side, I found that a certain amount of the steelwork in that area had distorted. Now, this was unusual. It wasn't the case further up the escalator, where it looked like there was a greater degree of heat damage. But right low down, at this point of origin, as I decided it was, that was where the steelwork was distorted and where the fire had been burning very hot.
Next, Dave Halliday squeezed down a steep and narrow stairway to examine the area underneath the escalator.
The only burnable materials that were present were a very thick layer of grease which had built up between the wheels on the trackway. It appeared to have been squeezed there by the natural action of the wheels over a period of time, and the grease itself was very dirty. It had a great deal of fluff impregnated in it. But I also found one other thing, which was when I looked at the skirting board directly above the grease on the trackway, there were a number of spots along it where there were small charred areas. These charred areas weren't very severe. They'd only led to the delamination of some of the plywood, indicating to me that there must have been, at some time, other small fires burning on that self-same escalator.
So how could all these small escalator fires have started? At the time of the King's Cross fire, you couldn't smoke on the tube, but you could light up once you came up the escalators.
It's very easy to strike a match, light your cigarette, and then, in your own eyes, safely dispose of the match by throwing it forwards and downwards, away from the passengers standing above you on the escalator stair.
But was that really how it happened? The only way to find out was for Dave Halliday to test it. First, he tried to light a sample of pure grease.
The match doesn't actually do a great deal to the grease, apart from actually melt it. In fact, even if I apply quite a vigorous flame from a Bunsen burner, I still can't get the grease to light. It's a very different story, though, if you use the grease which is impregnated with the dust and fluff. That makes all the difference. The dust and fluff mixed in with the grease acts as a wick, and that's why the grease burnt under King's Cross escalator.
The story now moves on to the remote Derbyshire peaks and a bizarre underground tunnel. It's the place where a little band of fire investigators carry out their subterranean experiments. Their job would be to work out why this killer fire had spread so fast.
We rebuilt part of the escalator in the tunnel that we're in at present, and we rebuilt about 5 to 6 steps of that escalator to full size. In fact, using wood taken from unburned sections of the other escalators. When the fire had spread onto the visible side of the escalator, it spread slowly across the treads and rises of the escalator, and it also radiated heat onto the other side of the escalator, and eventually the flames from one side reached across to the other and ignited the other side, and at that point the whole of the escalator became involved. At this stage, we'd established how the fire could spread across the escalator, but what we hadn't established was how that fire would then spread up the escalator, a matter of some 20 metres, in a time which was probably, by most accounts, less than a minute.
But answering that question had Keith Moody's people stumped. It was time for something new. Enter 2 computer scientists, whose speciality is how things flow.
The HSE are a little bit uncertain about the effect of the aerodynamics of the very complex tunnel arrangements and passages and the booking hall. They asked us to use a relatively new technique that we'd been using at that stage called computational fluid dynamics, and they thought that this new technique could open up some new insight into what had happened.
The HSE gave me plans of the tunnel and the booking hall, and actually more complex tunnels all around the system as well. But we decided we only needed to model that particular escalator tunnel and the booking hall itself. And I then had to transfer those dimensions of the geometry into the system so that the computer would know what the geometry looked like.
So Suzanne made up this spider's web-like simulation of the King's Cross booking hall and the 3 Piccadilly line escalators going down into the escalator tunnel.
What we had to do was to set up little bricks, like Lego bricks, connected all together. In each of these bricks, we would be solving the fundamental equations of fluid flow. They would all be connected together, and then we'd have to solve the equations in these tens of thousands of cells for many, many time steps to watch the development of the fire.
Once they'd built the skeleton of King's Cross, Suzanne ran the calculations. So complex was the mathematics, it took the computer 6 months before it gave results. And when it did, the 2 scientists were stunned.
the results were showing that the hot temperatures were near the floor of the escalator, and everybody knows that hot air rises.
That was quite a surprise. In fact, we were quite worried we'd got gravity turned upside down, for example, which is quite possible to do on the computer. So we went and checked that, found we had got gravity up the right way, but found that the escalator trench was actually the hottest part.
You normally wouldn't expect to see a fire lying low down, but what we were telling them was to look down, look at the effect of the fire and the wood that was all there, and from then on that would explain the very rapid, the reasons for the very rapid spread of the fire.
Could flames really spread downwards rather than up? Could hot air really fail to rise? Was this really why 31 people died? Keith Moody prepared for the ultimate test.
What we made here was a third-scale replica. The booking hall was up on the top here, and the escalator system ran down here to an entrance area at the bottom.
Once they'd spent all their effort on building it, they stepped back and set it on fire. Was the most unlikely of predictions to become a reality.
As the fire took hold, the flames were standing up, but after a few seconds, the flames actually lay down in the trench and started to travel up the trench. Someone who was standing at the top at the time said, "It's just like Howell said it would happen," which was nice to hear standing at the bottom.
And the effect of that was that both the radiant heat and the convective heat from the fire were available to preheat the wood in front of the flame front, so that wood would more readily ignite, and as a consequence that flame would travel at a faster and faster rate up the escalator. And anybody at the top would have been suddenly overtaken by a jet of flame emerging very rapidly into the booking hall.
It really gave people new insight into the behavior of the fire. It had shown them that the fire could spread in a way that was totally unexpected, and that effect became known as the trench effect, as a new phenomenon in fire dynamics.
So flames in a trench will stay low down, hugging the floor as they advance. On-site investigation, practical testing, physical reconstruction, computer simulation, all the available tools of the investigator's trade were used to piece together the puzzle of King's Cross. Following this remarkable discovery, undergrounds around the world were made safer for us all. The fire investigator's trade is rooted in experience, but it's always on the move. The world of virtual reality and portable computers has arrived. It could change the craft forever.
This is something totally new. This brings the fire scene to the investigator. This allows an investigator to come into a room, look 360 degrees around just like it's with his or her own eyes. Again, it immerses you right inside the scene. I can scan the entire living room just like I was standing there. I can look up. I can look down. I can change rooms. I can walk into another room and assess the damage in that room. It's only the beginning of what can be done with this type of technology.
But whatever the future may bring, the qualities a fire investigator needs will always remain the same.
Thorough, patient, curious, inquisitive, and they can't take no for an answer.
And details of next week's programme are coming up in just a moment. And the book of the series...
TWA jumbo jet on a routine flight from New York to Paris, France. Suddenly, it explodes and plunges burning into the Atlantic. There are over 200 people on board. Is it a missile attack, a terrorist bomb, or a catastrophic mechanical failure? Now, using advanced computer simulation, we reveal what really went wrong on flight TWA 800. Disasters don't just happen, they're a chain of critical events. Unravel the clues and count down those final seconds from disaster. It's the final piece of the puzzle. Investigators now know the probable chain of events that triggered the loss of TWA Flight 800. What tore apart a 300-ton jumbo jet just 12 minutes into a routine flight and left 230 passengers and crew seconds from disaster? 12.5 minutes to disaster. Flight 800 takes off. Air conditioners have been keeping passengers cool during the delay. But they've also heated the Jet A fuel in the center wing tank to flash point. It's now filled with almost 50 cubic meters of highly explosive fuel-air mix. The 747 is a flying bomb. 44 seconds to go.
Climb to 15,000.
Damaged wiring allows high voltage current to jump into wiring outside the center wing tank and run down into the tank. When the current reaches a section of bare wire, it jumps to another metal surface, forming a short circuit. The resulting spark ignites the deadly mix of fuel and air. Disaster strikes. The explosion blows out one of the inner panels. It strikes the tank's outer skin, smashing it into the plane's fuselage. At a speed of some 650 kilometers per hour, the aircraft is flying under massive pressure. And the first fuselage fracture spreads fast. Now multiple fractures race around the plane. In 4 seconds, they meet, severing the 747's nose. The nose plunges downward like a bullet. The rest of the plane, with most of the passengers still in it, soars upwards. Investigators believe that this is the trail of light eyewitnesses see streaking up into the sky. At 4,600 meters, the main section stalls. A tiny spark has brought down the enormous jumbo jet, killing 230 people.